This is from a woman who has been diligently practicing real love for a good while. Her husband, on the other hand, has tended to resist her, intimidate her, manipulate her, pretty much anything but actually cooperate in her efforts that have obviously made her happier as a person, as a wife and mother. And yeah, that just kind of doesn't seem to make sense, does it? Here she is doing something where the entire family is benefiting. She's happier. She's more loving to him. She's more loving to the kids. Everybody's getting it. And what's he doing? Resisting her, intimidating her, manipulating her so that she'll quit doing it. At first glance, it's like, are you crazy? It'd be like resisting somebody who's watering your lawn that's dying. But you have to remember, in his defense, and I mean this defense, it's not flippant, that they married in the first place. They came together in the first place with essentially an agreement that things would be a certain way. And now she's changing the rules. They're married with an agreement because he's been like this from the beginning. They're married with an agreement, although nobody did it consciously. And this is where it just gets so tricky because people say, well, I didn't do that. I hear this, by the way, every day. Yeah, you did. You didn't realize you were agreeing to it, but you agreed to it tacitly. In other words, without expressly saying so. You agreed to it by allowing it to happen. You agreed to it by accepting the pattern of a thing. So they got married in the first place with an agreement that he could intimidate and manipulate her because he's been doing it from the beginning. I know him, and he's always intimidating and manipulating people. He does it with everybody I've seen, including me. It's a little more amusing when he does it with me, but he does it. And so she agreed to be intimidated and manipulated. Now she's changing all the rules. Well, in his view, it's like, what, are you crazy? We had a contract, whether it was written or not, and you're coming along and changing the whole thing. He isn't like that. Crazy, huh? So she finally said that she was going to live in an unconditionally loving way. She was going to do it whether he liked it or not, and she wouldn't put up with his intimidating anymore, and she wouldn't listen to his criticisms of what he didn't believe. In other words, criticisms of the way she was doing things. That's pretty brave. It's pretty gutsy. Now, some of you might be thinking, because you've been listening to a few video chats before this, that, well, but doesn't this go against the idea of making decisions together as partners? We don't make decisions in the family unless both partners in the relationship agree to the decision. Well, kind of. If the discussion is about something that is pretty either benign or obviously good or simply a preference. But what if you decide to partner with somebody on a cross-country race and you switch off driving, or who knows, maybe you both have steering wheels. That in the old days, the driver education cars used to have steering wheels on both sides. So here you are on a cross-country trip, and your partner decides that he's going to see what it's like, just, for fun, to drive the car off the edge of the Grand Canyon. Think Thelma and Louise, for those of you who are film-minded. What would you do? Would you just stand by and do nothing? Would you say, well, he gets to do that? Would you say, well, we're just going to let him continue to drive off the cliff until we come to an agreement that we shouldn't? If you had any sense at all, you'd grab the wheel and you'd do whatever it took to keep you from going off the cliff. This woman's family was going off the cliff at high speed, and he was the only one with his hands on the wheel. And he was absolutely determined, with his foot pressed to the floor with the accelerator. He was determined he was going to go off fast. She decided, I'm not going to participate in that. We're going to actually explore a way of driving cross country, in other words, living our lives, in a way where we don't go off cliffs. That's not wrong. If your partner's doing something that's clearly going to destroy you, which is how he lives, sometimes you make unilateral decisions. Think about that. And kind of weave it into we make decisions together as partners. And she also told him that she would be teaching loving principles to their children. Why? Because it's saving their lives. I mean, what if one of your children had pneumonia and the doctor said there's only one antibiotic on earth that this bacteria is sensitive to, so you need to take this every day, and you get home and your partner says, yeah, I don't believe in antibiotics. Tough. We're talking about saving our child's life. So that's what she's doing here. She said she would be teaching loving to their children, and if he didn't like it, he could teach them something that he came up with that works. See, most victims, and he's a pretty classic victim, simply sit back and go, I don't like that. No, I don't like that, which is what he does. So he's been doing absolutely nothing to make the family more loving in all the years they've been married through several children, and has no plan at all. He's just kind of letting stuff happen. Good things rarely happen. Houses don't build themselves. Walls don't just erect themselves. Highways don't just suddenly appear. You actually have to have a plan and execute it. And he was doing nothing and hoping that his family would turn out all right. And by his definition, it was okay because he was in charge, because he controlled everything. And that was his definition of okay, because he was such an empty and miserable human being that simply experiencing power was happiness for him. Yeah, well, see, this isn't going to work. Like I said, foot to the floor and headed off the cliff. So she said, if you can come up with something that works, bring it on and we'll try your way. Well, that was pretty much the end of his objections, because he'd never had a plan, never had a hope of having a plan. The only plan he had was, I'm in charge and I'm all powerful. So he shut up because he realized he had no alternative, much less a better one. Only objections. She writes, long introduction, but it's important to understand the context sometimes. And pretty much everybody listening knows some variation on this. Whether you're in a partnership, whether you're at work, whether you're an employee, a peer, you've all seen this. She said, last night I pointed out to my husband, Garrett, something that I had noticed that he did that day that was not loving. Because see, she had decided that we're not going to do not loving in the family anymore. We're no longer going to allow people to take the garbage from outside and dump it in the living room instead of taking it to the street. I know, crazy, unreasonable. But that's what she decided to do. And that's all she was doing when she was pointing out to him that he'd done something unloving. Notice, she didn't tell him to stop it. She simply said, are you aware that what you did yesterday with whoever, actually that was that day, were you aware that that had a negative effect on our child, for example? And it was because he had acted exasperated and impatient, this is back to her speaking now, and unkind toward our son. Well, under what possible circumstances could that be a good thing? So she was just mentioning it to him because after all these years, he really doesn't see it. I'm defending him. He doesn't. But that's not good enough to say, well, I didn't see it, I'm doing my best. We have to elevate our best. She continues, and yes, our son had done something rude, something did need to be said, but Garrett, my husband, was rude right back at him, reacting like a child fighting with his own son in the sandbox. That's a pretty good metaphor, honey. That works. So he steps into the sandbox. The little kid throws sand on him. And what does he do? He throws sand right back in the kid's face. Yeah, this doesn't usually escalate well. We know how that turns out. He has proven it over and over how it works to intimidate his son. Because, see, I know his son. And I know the effect that it's had on his son and on his daughter of him intimidating them all the time. It has just nearly destroyed them. So he proves that it doesn't work over and over again, but he keeps doing it because he refuses to find the love he needs, as you did. I'm talking to her now. He won't do it. Why? People ask me that all the time. So why does this person not see the loving way and just pursue it? Well, one part is familiarity. He's been living the same way his entire life. He's found a few rewards from that. Intermittent and illusory safety, some power, some pleasure maybe, some praise for being in control. And since he's never experienced unconditional love, he's going, well, why would I vary from a program that works now and again? And the second reason he doesn't do it is just fear. Scares him to death to be truly vulnerable. Now, back to speaking to the writer. He can see that you're happier. But out of pride and fear, he refuses to try anything that could pose an emotional risk for him. For him, risk is unacceptable because he controls everything. Why does he control? Fear. He's afraid of pain. He's in pain 24/7, 25/7 if there were 25 hours in a day. He's always in pain. And so control is his way of minimizing his pain. Anything he can't control could hurt him, so he controls it all. You continue. Garrett got scared when I brought this up, that he had said something unloving to our son. And he started talking about the way I brought it up, that I didn't say it in the right way. What did I just say? Victims don't have plans. They just sit back and go, I don't like what you're doing. Cheap job. I would like that job. Well, I really wouldn't. But how effortless. I can just sit back against a tree and just go, I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't like it. And that's what victims do. They don't like anything. And they actually think they're contributing something. So back to you speaking. So he got scared, said that he didn't like the way I brought it up. He talked about the percentages, this is what controlling people would do, of how wrong he was versus how wrong our son was. Now imagine this. Here's a father raising a son, and he's saying in a given interaction, well, but he was 65% wrong, and I was 35% wrong. That's almost a comedy stand-up routine. And he was just using it to justify that his motivation wasn't all bad. He was so wounded as a child, Garrett was, that sometimes he just cannot stop himself from being defensive. It is reflexive. Combat veteran comes back from Afghanistan, you drop a plate, there's a loud noise of a bang of some kind, and they don't sit there and think, I wonder what the sound was. I could just sit here and finish my meal and be happy, or I could drop to the floor under the table and take cover because of the incoming mortar fire. No, they don't make decisions. It is a reflex. Boom, it happens just like that. PCSD has the same reflexive response. Nobody thinks about it. They do it. So he can't stop himself from being defensive because he's afraid all the time. Afraid of what might happen to him because of the way his son behaves, because of the way you behave, like when you brought this up, the way the world is, protecting himself is a very well-established habit. It's PCSD. Even when there is no actual threat. People who have PTSD or PCSD, they don't need a real threat, like a plate dropping on the floor 12 feet away. What are the odds that a shard of the plate is going to shoot across the room and blind them? Well, I was an eye surgeon for 20 years, not going to happen. And if it did manage to travel across the room at 12 feet, it would have no speed by the time it got there. All we need to provoke our PCSD is a perceived threat. It doesn't have to be real at all. So you continue. I told him that I know he wants to be loving toward our son. That was really smart of you to do. I know you want to love our son. Oh, how smart to start off with something loving. And then you continued, and that he has shown many times that that is his priority. He's trying. People who have PCSD aren't pretending to defend themselves. He calmed down a little bit, and then he told me that he actually knows very well that it was unloving and that it was just the visible tip of the iceberg. Oh, allow me to sigh for 5 minutes of relief. You were loving and teaching. Everybody hear this. What's the best way to respond to somebody who's angry, whatever? Loving and teaching. You were loving by saying, I know you want to love our son. And here's what happened. Loving and teaching. And how did he respond? Well, he could have just argued and been angry and defensive, but in great part because of your approach, he listened. This is pretty great insight on his part. You continue. He had in general been unloving most of the weekend, not just on that occasion. I hadn't actually picked up on that. It had only become apparent to me when I saw his irritation toward our son. As we kept talking, he shared more about how stressed he felt because of his upcoming work trip and that he'd been very distracted by that. He said this weekend would have felt like a normal weekend, but because of his new awareness of the difference between peacefulness and anger, he could see that he was far from peaceful. Wow, this is a lot from him. Very often in the beginning, as people begin to feel loved, their lives actually seem worse. Why? Well, one thing is just plain contrast. If you've been living on a scale of 0 to 10 at a level of 5 in pain, well, then you wouldn't notice it, would you? But once you'd experienced what 0 or 1 looked like for possibly the first time in your life, well, then you'd begin to recognize 5 as painful. Whereas before it was just normal. It wasn't even painful. You wouldn't even notice pain until it was 8. So contrast would be one reason that things would seem worse. And people are finally feeling the pain they've always had. I've had personal experience with a great number of people. And many people will say, well, I was unconditionally loved when I was a kid. And they keep maintaining that. And often I choose not to address the subject with words. But then at a point when they're feeling extraordinarily loved and cared for, I say, in all of your childhood, did you ever feel like this moment? And then the tears come rolling out. No, I've never felt like this. Bingo. What they're saying is, I thought 5 was normal. And now I can see that a level of 5 pain isn't, well, it may be normal, but isn't healthy, isn't acceptable. So they finally feel the pain that they buried. You continue. This might sound obvious, but when he acts obviously irritated, that is just the part I get to see. And it's just an indication that there's an iceberg of tension underneath it. Brilliant. Yes. You say, so in the future, I'll continue to be vigilant about unloving behaviors, but it will be more of like this, quote, and I'm quoting her. These are the things that are telling me that you're stressed out. I'm just observing you. I'm using it as an indication to see how you're feeling. So what's actually going on? How can I help? Does that sound, now she's talking to me again, does that sound like a good approach for now? Or is there something else I need to do? Actually, your suggestion is perfect. You observe his behavior, and when he's angry or irritable or whatever, he's in pain. And you say what you just said. What's going on? How can I help? How can I help is pretty disarming. As opposed to, I'm annoyed that you, whatever. Or I hate it when, or you're stressing me out too. Especially when you speak gently while you're touching him. He loves that. You're there to be his partner, not his accuser. And he's understanding that better all the time, the more you practice. My congratulations to you. No kidding. Big stuff. New subject. A woman woke up and emailed me that she felt lost and afraid. She's been loved and taught only for several months, but her life is unrecognizable. She's like a different person. People will say to her, what happened to you? When I met her, she was a frightened ball of pain, kind of like a ball of razor wire. She was frightened. It scared people to be around her because fear is infectious. Horrible relationships for decades, afraid of everyone, angry at everyone. And as she was feeling loved, she managed to find peace, strength, connection. It was miraculous. No kidding. And it was, well, because she was trusting. But the morning of that particular email, she was feeling lost and afraid. So it can be really easy to just keep reassuring people when they're afraid. You know, everything's okay. Well, I still love you. The world is still a beautiful place. This will pass. And sometimes that's appropriate, but sometimes we're doing other people's work for them. We're just saving them. We never teach them to swim. We just keep pulling them out of the water into the boat, which doesn't take a whole lot of skill. So I suggested that she go through past emails from me and from other people who had loved her, that she watch some video chats like this one, read a few pages of her real love book, meditate, pray, go for a walk, sing a song about how there are people who love her. If you don't know a song like that, there are. You can Google them and find them. Make one up. Make up your own words in your own tune. And if it doesn't rhyme and the tune is terrible, well, make it up anyway. Remember all the things that really are good. Whatever works till you get to the peaceful feeling that you're missing now. At the end of the day, she wrote, before I go to bed, I want you to know that I thought all day about what is true now, instead of wallowing in my fears from the past and about the future. I made up a little song like you suggested. No, I'm not going to sing it here. And I sang it all day. I'm feeling loved and happy. I can hardly believe that I was even afraid this morning. I will sleep peacefully and well. So everybody who's listening, pay close attention. This is an illustration of what we sometimes refer to as EJFR, event, judgment, feeling, reaction. She consciously, purposefully, faithfully, bravely chose to change her judgment. And then her feelings and responses changed. So what was the old judgment? That she was alone, that the world is frightening, that she's unloved and it will never change. That's 4 judgments, but they combine to create a pretty terrible one. The world's an awful place. What's the new judgment? What did she choose to believe? Not because it's more positive, but because it's true. What did she choose? People love me. She has ample evidence of that. She named those people in her song. God loves me. She had ample evidence of that. She's felt it. I have nothing to fear. And in her words, including death. We all die. I sometimes wonder when we're going to get that. Like, everybody's terribly surprised when somebody dies. We sort of came here to be born and to die. Born, die. They're inseparable. So we celebrate a baby's birth, and then when somebody dies, we cry when that's part of the process. Crying makes sense if we understand that we're crying only for ourselves, or possibly feeling bad for those who remain and will miss that person. But death is just part of life. I know a friend who was just out having fun, and it had lightly rained, and he reached up to grab hold of a boulder, which he's done 1,000 times before, slipped on the boulder, fell 15 feet, and died. He was young. I have another friend, young, and I was there in the hospital. He was a coworker, and an aneurysm burst in his head. Poof, dead. Fell over, 20-something years old. Another was jogging. Why? For his health, and he was hit by a car, which turned out not to improve his health, and he was dead. You cannot control whether you're alive. Now, you can control dying stupid, driving too fast around a corner or driving off a cliff, but you can control how happy your life is, how happy the time that you have is. There's a man named Bertolt Brecht who said, don't fear death so much, but rather the inadequate life. Live all you can right now. And we've had more than one illustration of that so far, just in this chat. I got a little bit distracted by the death subject. We were talking about fear. I don't know what happened to me. So back to the real point. This previously frightened and weak woman, I remember, because one of her fears was about death, and I didn't really clearly state that. She's become happy and powerful as a result of changing her judgments, that she is loved, that the world can be a happy place, that it's going to be okay because she's seen it, not because she hopes it. Aided, of course, by people loving and teaching her. So once she changes her judgment, her feelings and reactions immediately change. They have to. Your feelings and reactions are based on what you judge. She changed them, and so did her feelings and reactions. Now, she'll still have other judgments to change for the rest of her life, or have to banish the old ones again. How many times have I had to do that? The point is, there's a choice here. We do not have to be unhappy. We make choices. New subject. This is from a woman who's been practicing real love with considerable intensity. She realized that she'd been in pain all her life, and it had ruined her happiness, her job, satisfaction, her relationships, pretty much a disastrous life. She kept going. It got very difficult at times practicing these new principles, practicing unconditional love. But she kept going. She did not quit. The only people I've ever seen fail to benefit from the power of feeling unconditionally loved are the people who quit. You can fall down all you want. You can create a rock slide and go down with it. What matters is whether you get up. Why do people begin real love but fail to experience the transformative experience that is possible? Because they quit. Not saying they're bad, not criticizing them, or lazy, or defective. They quit because there's a part of them that, based on all their past experience, event, judgment, feeling, reaction, all of their past experience, all their past events have created a judgment that life sucks. All of them. Well, that's pretty easy to stay with. A judgment that's backed up by your entire life experience. They just can't entertain the possibility that change is possible, that the old judgment is wrong, that there's a new one that's true. It's just like a billboard in their head. The world is bad. I am bad. I am worthless. I'm going to be in pain. I need to protect myself. They can't believe in what they can't see or feel. And prior to being introduced to unconditional love, they haven't seen or felt it. There's too much fear to get vulnerable enough to feel anything other than fear. Fear's a feeling, but not exactly a feeling that we work for. It's just more, I think of fear more as a reaction than I do a feeling. It's just an automatic reaction, like a knee jerk. Now, back to the woman who's writing. She found love. She trusted it. She felt it, and she began to share it with lots of people. The opportunities to share unconditional love with people are everywhere. I'm not kidding. Just recently, I was standing at the counter of the driver's license branch, whatever, the Department of Motor Vehicles. It's called different things in different states. Not usually considered a hub of happiness. Everybody sitting in the waiting room, glum, holding their number, waiting for it to come up so that they can go up to an attendant or a clerk who goes, "Give me your birth certificate." Not usually a happy place. I was standing at the counter of this place, and I just started talking to the lady, talking to her about her life. I could see her life in her face, talking to her about her life, my life. In no time at all, there was a crowd around us. There were people listening. There were people chatting through the walls, chatting through the little partitions. This lady just walks up to people at church and says, "You're not alone." She's sharing this with me. She listens. It's miraculous what you can hear, what you can do once you felt enough love. You can have opportunities to share this with people everywhere you go. She said that she was laid off at her place of business, a nice job, and was in the process of finding something. But she wrote me and she said, "I had another job interview today, second round, and halfway through the interview, they asked questions about how I would get the best out of large teams where there are people set in their ways or resistant to change. I talked about how resistant people are just afraid and need to know that somebody cares about them while they are simultaneously trained." So here she is in a job interview, and she's teaching these people the effect of love in the workplace. She was asked a question about it, but she leaned the answer toward unconditional love. This is just love and teach, as we've talked about many times in reference to parenting, coaching, the workplace. She continues, "In my answer to the two interviewers, I talked a little bit about my real love journey, and then they wanted to know more about real love. They called it by name. It was unbelievable. We went off on a huge tangent where they were asking loads of questions about it and then asked for the name of the book. And one of the two people interviewing me actually asked if I could personally coach her." Kind of amazing, huh? At a job interview. People are so disarmed when we are genuine. It's amazing the courage we get when we feel loved. And then filled with that courage and confidence, people tend to listen. They do. And a few of those people will listen to the truth and recognize it. They'll feel it. If you want to broaden your world, if you want to share who you are and how you discovered that by eliminating your fear, you can do it. You share about your life and you will broaden your world. It's like adding members to your family as you just love and teach people. That's really what family is. A real parent is just somebody who loves and teaches. One teacher wrote me just the other day and was describing how they're now using in their school as a part of the curriculum for the teachers, loving and teaching. Because the principal and everybody else in the school has noticed that her class is different from everybody else's because she loves and teaches. Because she doesn't have discipline problems, because the kids feel loved. They feel like part of her family. This lady continues talking about these two ladies interviewing her. She says they couldn't stop asking questions. One of them teared up. This is during a job interview, as I explained that most of us feel inadequate on some level and how passionate I am about helping people feel good about themselves. These are two women from top level universities and at top levels in the corporation. And they teared up at the idea of feeling unconditionally loved. She says, I talk so openly in my interviews about how insecure I used to be and how I used to use my job to try and prove my worth. And when running large programs at work out of fear, there's no space or time to think about anybody else. When we're afraid we can't lead, is what she said to these two people who were looking for somebody to have a leadership job. Now, take a guess. Here she is teaching these people things about leadership they've never heard before in their lives. Think she got hired? She did. Probably would have put her in charge of the company if they could have. She continues, I talked about how now I'm more focused on how I can make my team feel, or my teams feel. And because I'm no longer afraid of failing, I have so much more capacity to see and focus on what other people need. As a result, I tend to deliver better work because we all have a lot more fun. This sounds like an odd thing to say because I'm juxtaposing two things that are just not usually put together. Unconditional love makes money. Really. Why? Because the one resource that we can change the most in the workplace is people. What do people want more than anything else? They want to feel loved. If we can introduce that, we can change everybody's feelings. The world has become so globally interdependent and interconnected that you really can't find like better materials than everybody else, better supply chain. You can hire somebody who knows that. Pretty much all the information in your field is available to everybody in some way, almost. But we can change the way we treat our people immediately. And it makes an enormous difference because people who feel loved are more creative, cooperative, energetic, zealous, kind, helpful to customers. It just goes on and on. Real love makes money. New subject. This is from a man who was raised in circumstances that would make you shake your head. You kind of wouldn't believe them. Make your hair stand on end. He was abandoned by parents, like as in they just walked off and went, yeah, well, we made a mistake. You're too much trouble. Imagine your self-esteem right about then. He was shuffled from place to place, from one relative to another and one foster home to another. The kid was raised utterly alone. How could you feel anything but alone when you're being shuffled from one place where you're not wanted to another place where you're not wanted? And then he began to find unconditional love from people in real love who were intentionally loving him. It has changed everything in his life, his happiness, his relationships, everything. He writes, I had an old friend show up today expecting me to drop everything and go for a drink, knowing that I don't drink anymore. The trade has run out. I stayed home. That's a pretty great way to say it. The trade is over. That's how we form our friendships in the absence of real love. What else is there? We trade imitation love. I'll go out drinking with you. We'll both trade pleasure, praise, power back and forth. And at the end of the evening, we'll slap each other on the back and say, oh man, we got to do this again. And it's gone by morning, if not sooner. Actually, if you're drunk enough, it's already gone. The trade is over, this man says, with his old friend, because remember, he formed his old relationship based on trading. So of course there was a trade. He's not being condescending or snotty here. He's just saying, I don't trade anymore. And now that the trade is over, what's left? It was based on trading, so there's nothing left. Trade is over, so the friendship is over. We form our friendships based on trading. Without real love, that's the only way to do it. So of course we like people more if they give us the amount and kind of imitation love we like. Duh. So you tell a joke, and in a group of 5 people, there are 2 people who just laugh uproariously at our joke. Who do we like more? The people who make us feel better. Even if it's not real, it's better than nothing, or at least seems to feel better than nothing. But then we discover unconditional love. So picture this. In the beginning, we're with friends who are going in roughly the same direction we are. Let's pick a direction, north. I'm not making one direction better than another. It depends on where you want to go. Then we find real love. So we and our friends are going north. It's a little ridiculous to point up for north, but to me, maps are always north up. Then we find real love and we change our direction. Let's say we go east. Well, see what just happened? Our old friends are going north and we're going east. Conclusion? We will move apart. It's simple physics. Simple vectors, north compared to east. We're not going to end up in the same place. In fact, we're going to separate pretty quickly. There's no criticism of people who are going north. After all, we were going north with them. And now we've decided, well, I'd really rather go east. There's no arrogance, no condescension. We're just not headed in the same direction anymore. And we can't end up in the same place. We don't throw away old friends. They just tend to go away because of that change in direction. And we can't force them. We can invite them to go with us. Like earlier in the chat, we talked about a lady whose husband just fights and criticizes her and intimidates her about anything she does regarding real love. And she just finally said, honey, I'm going east. Because east is where the pot of gold is, whatever. It's happier. It's obviously happier. Our whole family's happier. You're continuing to choose to go north. You get to do that. I'm not going to force you to go north, but I'm also not going to stand by while you attempt to force with intimidation and persuasion and endless haranguing. I'm not going to stand by while you try to force the family to keep going north, when we know that east is happier. That's all. Vectors. New subject. I know a lady who's been trying to live real love for some time, has severe PCSD, post-childhood stress disorder. Insanely rageful mother and father who just withdrew from it all, withdrew from life, leaving her unprotected. She learned to be afraid all the time. Do you know most of us are afraid all the time? We get used to it, but she was extra afraid all the time. Instead of living at a 5 all the time, she was at 6.5 all the time. She was especially triggered by a boyfriend and by her parents and her brother and her sister. Why? Because by definition, PCSD is a condition where we are triggered in the present to react to the present as though it were the past. There's a pretty short definition of PCSD. Or PTSD. You're triggered in the present, a car backfiring, to associate that sound with something that happened in the past, like an artillery round blowing up or a grenade exploding, and you react to all of it. The event in the present, the event in the past, sometimes all the events in the past. It's all about triggering. So she was especially triggered by a boyfriend, by her parents and her brother and her sister. Why? Because they especially reminded her of past events. How could they not? Those people, other than her boyfriend, were the past events. And now they continue to do the same thing. That's pretty triggering. And because she was familiar with it, she chose a boyfriend who reminded her of her parents and siblings, and so pretty much guaranteed that she would be triggered by him. But she kept trying. She kept trying to learn real love. She kept trying to practice it with her family and boyfriend, feeling like, and this is what she told me, feeling like she really needed to face her triggers and practice loving when it's hard. That sounds pretty good. Triggering and being with difficult people and situations is exactly when we heal most. If, big if, we can remember that we're loved. If you're loved when everything's going great, that has an impact. You actually get to store that up and get to change your judgment slowly. But if you feel enveloped in unconditional love while you're being triggered, oh, that really makes a big difference. Much bigger. If we feel loved while we're in pain, if we feel loved while we're afraid, but, that's all caps, B-U-T, but, we must do this as we're able, face our triggers as we are emotionally able to do it. Not just every time the triggers occur, not just when we think we should face the triggers, like with family, where we feel, well, almost nailed to the wall, obligated, and guilty if we don't do it. This is important stuff. When we put ourselves in situations that are beyond our capabilities, when we simply don't have the ability to feel loved while we're being wounded, then triggering becomes re-wounding. I'm going to say it again because it's really important. We think we have to face our triggers sometimes, but if we enter a situation where we can't feel loved while we're being wounded, it's not triggering anymore. It's re-wounding. It's experiencing the whole thing over again, and just makes the pain worse. And continuing to practice doing it simply becomes injury. Then staying in that situation and facing our triggers is just, well, dumb and hurtful, crazy. Think about physical training, which is very much like emotional training. Practice is good. In fact, I don't know how you become better at physical anything without practice. But if you run too far, or you lift weights that are too heavy, just like emotional triggers, you don't get stronger, you get hurt. People get shin splints, they get compression fractures, they get microfractures, they stress tendons, they get sprains, they just get injured. And if you're already injured, you don't heal from more practice. You have to rest. You just get re-wounded if you keep practicing when you're injured. The same with emotional injury and training. You do it only as you are able to without making your wounds worse. People will very often tell you what you should do. Your family, boyfriend, wife, minister, whoever, and they mean well, and shoot, they may quote sayings to you that you need to face up to your problems and buck up. Well, but see, they don't know what you're capable of. They're quoting to you principles out of context that don't finish the sentence. Face up to your pain, your trials, your difficulties when you're able to do that, or they'll crush you. They'll wound you. You're the only one who knows what you're capable of. Now, admittedly, when you're afraid and lost, sometimes you don't know either. But you have a better idea than they do, unless it's somebody who knows you spectacularly well. And often you will overestimate your strength. You know why? Because you're burdened by the word should. Oh, I can handle that. And sometimes when I hear people say that, I say, fascinating. How do you know that? Well, I should be able to do this. The should qualification. Just because I should be a better parent doesn't render me capable of being one. If I've never had any training to be one, if I've never been loved as a child. So how do you figure out what you're capable of without being injured? Oh, practice and experience. I've done it many, many times in my life as I work outside and do yard work, as I play racquetball and tennis and lift weights. And I've done a lot of sports in my life. And you kind of learn when you need to stop. When you have tennis elbow and you keep swinging the racket, notably your backhand, in the wrong way, the more you do it, the more you're going to get hurt. So continuing to do it is not what they call smart. You learn by practice. And very often that practice means going too far and getting hurt. Well, okay, fine, but learn from it. If you notice that every time you do X, Y, or Z, you end up more hurt, you might consider tapering off X, Y, and Z, actually cutting them out for now until you heal. You conclude, I so feel that I should be better at hearing stuff. So I want to go all out to practice and try to fix it to make it work. But then, bam, I'm lost. So I'll try to spot it when I feel the trigger and get out of that situation. Well, you were listening. When triggering turns into wounding, when practice turns into injury, you don't keep going. Even when people are screaming at you what you should be able to do. Always ask yourself, how would things be different if I brought love into this? How would my life be different? How would I affect other people different if I were more loving? But because of this last little segment we talked about, there are times that you don't have any love to bring into the situation. And in that situation, stay out of it and go get love from somewhere else. Learn to feel more peaceful, learn to feel less afraid, and then go back to practicing. And if you feel yourself being rewounded again, not just triggered, rewounded. Triggering is an automatic response. Rewounding just keeps hurting. It's kind of a clue. We need to do what we're capable of doing. We need to do the best we have at the time. And sometimes the best we have at the time is nothing. And that's okay. We'll see you in a week.